Nice to see you all. Thank you for joining the live stream if you're able. If not, and you're watching us later, just pretend that you're live, although it won't be the same in the chat. Other than that, welcome to the show. We try to host these weekly live shows, Christian Witnesses of Jah, or anybody who wants to join us, where we talk about the Bible, specifically, though, as it relates to our beliefs. Primarily, they are three. I say primarily because every Christian witness of Jah has his or her own beliefs where it concerns everything but these three. One God the Father, Jah, Jah-O. Some people say Jehovah or Yahweh. We try to accommodate any pronunciation that people are more familiar with and prefer to use, but we still advocate for the best, least disputed of which is Jah, in English, Jah, Yah in Hebrew, basically the same in Greek, or Yah-O, a form which may or may not be familiar to you, depends on how much you keep up with the divine name. Either way, I've written about it, I've talked about it. There have been recent findings that I believe validate my position and others, but one I advocate after having, used Jehovah as one of Jehovah's Witnesses for so long. And I still bear witness, of course, to Jehovah, the God of the Bible. I just don't do so in association with Watchtower for obvious reasons, right? At least if you understand the history and development of Watchtower and their teachings on prophecy and chronology. Many other things, they're great. Just like in other groups, you can find great teachings too. But if you have to compromise over things that are clearly not true, just because a group teaches some things that are true, we don't think that's right. We think that it's better to just limit the things we require of people and then let each other be judged by the master, which is how it's going to happen anyway, right? Of course, we hold each other accountable a la Matthew 18 if there's something serious, like a real sin that is offensive to someone in a way that they need to go to that person directly and try to resolve, which should be what you're trying to do, right? We're not here to create problems or make it more difficult than it already is to be a Christian or someone who's trying to live a moral life. We individually struggle with things, society puts pressures on us, and we believe we have to resist demons and spirits at times that are not on our side. But we believe we have the Holy Spirit, and that though we're sinful, we can still use it to overcome obstacles and difficulties, live in this world, proclaim John Jesus, and look forward to a time in the future when the earth will be a better place. We do believe that's going to happen, kind of like Watchtower and other groups, but we don't believe in this same kind of separation between Christians as people who are a great crowd and people who are anointed. Some partake, some don't. We believe the great crowd of Revelation 7, at least most of us do. This isn't a required belief again. You could actually believe like Watchtower and just not force other people to believe that way. And as long as you believe our three things, one God the Father, like I said, Jah. Number two, Jesus, firstborn, sent forth Savior from heaven. And three, the golden rule. Those are our three required beliefs that if you advocate above everything else, we support you. We'll be there to support you. Now, if you're just there to create problems, right? Christian Witnesses of Jah, we stand up for our beliefs just like any Christian should, but we don't go looking for problems. That's not our mission. That's vanity, right? If we're just trying to go out and defeat someone by argument, logically, using verses and our knowledge of the Bible, well, again, I have done that quite a bit, but in settings and in ways I believe fit. While none of us are perfect and we can all do things a little differently, the fact is, Christianity is so much more, right? It's not just this debate that it often has or is and becomes. This kind of ties in, welcome again, to Christian Witnesses of Jah discussion number 33. My name is Greg Stafford, if you didn't know that. And I've been associated with the Watchtower since a third generation, born into it. Didn't celebrate holidays when I was a kid. We did other things. My parents were a little bit more open. They became more devoted as I got older. So I was raised around it. I went to meetings, and then I took it very seriously as I became a junior in high school. Started really talking to everybody at school, outside, everywhere. Got baptized in 1990. Again, started taking things very seriously. That was the same year I graduated from high school, Huntington Beach. But I'd already been active, like I said, since my junior year for about 2 years or more, and I'd known about it earlier. But I really got going in my junior year at school and outside. There were a lot of born-again Christians, evangelicals, some Catholics, but mostly in Huntington Beach, Orange County. It was a born-again Calvary Chapel, evangelical type of people. So I had a lot of exposure with them all over the place, and I was very active in that way. Started taking it very seriously, going door to door, Watchtower and everything. Again, around in 88. I'd been raised around it, but I got really serious junior year. Graduated, got baptized in 1990 at Dodger Stadium. Got baptized there, graduated from Huntington Beach. And then I was pioneering, about 18, pioneering for a few years, ministerial servant. Then I got married at 21. And stayed in Watchtower till about 2003. Now, I'd kind of started to leave about 2002 because of issues, primarily the blood issue, but also other things that started to become incompatible with the kind of dedication they wanted you to have to all of their doctrine, right? But the blood issue, after dealing with fractions, right, in my first edition of Jehovah's Witnesses Defended, or second, I should say, I did deal with it in terms of discussing components, right? Or blood, in the sense of it being something that if the Bible prohibits, it should be prohibited completely. But even that isn't consistent, right? That's how you interpret the Bible, with how the Watchtower manages it, right? Because they actually do allow for the withdrawing and storing of blood, and then the fraction, making it into components, and then fractionating those components. Fractions are not allowed, basically, most of them, maybe hemoglobin at this point. But the policy changes and has changed so much, as you know. I wrote a long history and discussion of it in my 3 dissertations. If you don't have that, you probably get it. I did also a blog article, Watching the Ministry. I haven't updated that recently. There are some discussions on there that I think are important. Either way, we have these weekly discussions where we try to just meet and talk, pump each other up. Like, I was just pumped up right there. I was just, I had to get on here and see everybody who's here. I had to talk and tell everyone, hey, praise Jah, right? Jesus, golden rule. That's what we're doing. We got Betsy. Good to see you, Betsy. Ricky and Everett. Very nice. Everett's pumped up about Genesis 19:24. We'll get to that in just a second. Let's see here. Ricky's pumped up. Dave Bissack. Good to see you, David. And Jawad White. Very nice to see you. See, I don't want to miss you one if I can help it before we get going. Bankhead. Very nice, very nice. Okay, so what we're going to do here. Oh, yeah. So, let me just explain a little bit again. Some of you may be new shows and stuff. So many of us come from different backgrounds. Mine is from Watchtower, but I was raised in it, right? Once I got a little older, got married, took it really seriously, as I said, started getting really deep into it, things that take a while, blood issue being the main one, and the society's handling that over time in light of the actual text. The fact that the text in its historical context really can't be required to include modern day medical transfusions of blood as blood, not eating or drinking as food, right? If you want to argue you shouldn't eat or drink blood, that has some merit. That's kind of what I talk about in my 2nd edition. My 3rd edition, I get into the historical timeline. I think it's in my 3rd edition. Might be some in the 2nd. There's some in the 2nd, or 3 dissertations, I'm sorry. And in the 2nd. But I give a broader timeline of the blood issue in my 3rd edition. third edition of JWD definitely, I believe, has the broadest timeline of detail I did on the blood issue. 3D does too, 3 dissertations. Yes, I am working on a PDF version. I think Juan Rivera's been, he's going to get a copy of that. Don't worry, Juan. Just been busy, I got stuff I got to do. I don't always have, a lot of time. Work has been really busy. It's been great, though. I've been getting a lot of stuff going on my own. A lot of really good work that allows me to also simultaneously write and do things, develop my claim adjusting and expert consulting business, which I've had for a long time, but I also at times will work for carriers or third-party administrators, right, in the insurance adjusting world. Wherever there's a need, sometimes there's needs everywhere, right? But there are a lot of different types of claims. There are high exposure, multi-million-dollar construction defect liability claims. There are your basic property water loss claims. I don't handle a lot of those anymore. It's kind of the stuff you learn when you first start. But when I started with my own business, or even now, where if I had a lot and made sense, you're getting a lot with a client, those do make financial sense. I'm just saying they're basically a small claim usually. Then you have house fires, right? You have buildings that get damaged by earthquakes. These involve more investigation and forensic analysis, right? So it's a lot of work that can be involved. Either way, no matter what, we try to be here every Saturday, right? Because if I don't do that, you know what's going to happen? Betsy is going to come and just boom, boom, boom. Right, I need to be pumped up. And I'm sitting there and I want to be pumped up too, right? Spiritually, all that stuff, right? But, we get busy with life. We get diverted. Sometimes we need people to say, wait a minute, back to the drawing, back to where you're, get the stuff done here. So I try to be mindful of that, right? Now, understand, you may love like the first 10 minutes of one of my videos. Everything's going, you're pumped up, you're like, that's exactly how I feel right there. And then out of nowhere, you might hear something you don't agree with, right? Or maybe you wouldn't say. I don't use profanity, very rare. I can count on one hand the number of videos I've used a moderately profane term in a non-profane context, right? In what I believe is a proper description of something that happened or someone who acted in a way that, because of the rare times I use it, fits, where they intruded or did certain things, right, that assumed certain inappropriate things that I feel at times maybe I need to shame that person so they don't do it again and other people don't keep doing it to me. This leads us to Everett. No, I'm kidding. Kind of. It leads us to Genesis 19:24, which is what Everett wants, right? That's why I said Everett. Now, it's not Everett why I brought this up, though. But it doesn't surprise me. Everett's out there. He's always pumped. He's out on fire. Sometimes I have to manage Everett a little bit because he could totally destroy it, right? He has his ability to generate intensity, right? Something has to happen. So, I have to just put myself out there and take the blow. I have to say, okay, Everett, all right, go. Okay, no, all right. No, I've already said that. Right. Now, Genesis 19:24, that's different. I did look it up. I didn't check my first edition, but, it might be a little different. The 3 editions, on some are very different. Some have totally different sections, but some are just moderately different or the same. Either way, I've talked about this text a little bit. We're going to talk about Genesis. Well, okay, let me say this first before I do like a brief intro, because I might clip this. Before I do that, so we're going to get into a topic related to the image you saw on this thumbnail for this show. Usually I will pick an image where the main theme of the show, we talk about other stuff like we have been and still will. Genesis 19:24, Everett, coming up. But at some point, we're going to get into a few texts. It's not like these are 2 hours or less usually, and it goes by pretty quickly. At the very end, we partake of the bread and wine because as Christians, we believe that's what we should do when we come together and we're able to. We're not able to, well, we do what we can, right? But when we are able and we're able to plan it a little bit, then we try to do it like the Bible tells us to. So like I was saying earlier, I was kind of going over a few things, but with Watchtower, right, we're not like them in terms of having people who partake and don't partake. Well, I guess you could or could not. It's up to you. We don't go around like counting and enforcing things. We just believe that's what Christians should do. We don't believe there's this group who's the great crowd of Revelation 7 that's here right now. I don't know of anyone in our group who believes that, like that the great crowd that Revelation 7 says appears after the tribulation. I don't know anyone who thinks that that group's here right now. Maybe a few are, I guess. Again, we don't go around forcing people to believe every little detail. As long as you're focused, okay, you believe all that. I don't really agree with you on that, but Jah, Jesus, you and me, you're good on that. Okay, well, that's fine. You can have your own views on different topics and beliefs. That's what the Bible says. We're not accountable to each other on every little detail or matter. That's where a lot of groups go wrong, especially Watchtower, right? Whoa, they've gone way overboard on that. And we've tried to help. They don't want to listen. Now, they've made some changes recently. Looks like the hourly requirement reporting, that's gone. That's a huge change. Of course, we've been telling them that makes no sense and creates problems for a long time. So they're really just catching up to us, aren't they? Especially on things like the divine name. Either way, good to see Faithful Theology as well. Nice to have you with us. So we're going to get to Genesis 19:24. And in fact, Faithful Theology just reminded me. Okay, we did a series recently on the angels of Jah or Jehovah in Zechariah. Now, if you haven't watched that series, I recommend you do. Because we read the whole book, and I think it's pretty clear that the angel of Jah or Jehovah, whom Trinitarians often identify as a person of the Trinity, a pre-incarnate Jesus, but who's basically an eternal angel, equal with God, even though we argue about it in other ways. But again, watch that series. I don't want to relive all that. I talk about a lot of stuff. Hebrews 1, Acts 7, okay? So a lot of what's in that video, and in some other videos I've done, the angel of Jahuah, it's called that because we used to say Jahuah, and I still sometimes do. I made that term because with a hyphenated ah at the end after Ja'o, to help people kind of transition off of Jehovah, because I knew this was coming, even before the 13th century BCE finding recently, last couple months, right? So this has been over a decade in my blog, last JWD edition, and the editions before that. I point out Ya'o is probably the way to go. And more recently, in my videos on this channel, I've said, look, this is going to happen. If you want the best form based on the best evidence, no, it's not Jehovah. It's not Dr. Nehemiah Gordon's later Masoretic rabbinic form that totally contradicts all the early best evidence, which I'll talk about more in a future video. But either way, right, we're trying to promote the best evidence. And if you don't like Ja'o, you don't want to say Ya'o, say whatever you want. Say Yahweh, say Jehovah. And if it becomes an issue, just say Jah, okay? Nobody really disputes Jah, I don't think, not even the Jews. And they don't have any law against saying it today. So Jah, that's probably the best thing to do when you come together like we try to, while we discuss issues and there's some disagreement or argument sometimes. Here especially, we try to focus on how we can unite and understand these issues, right? Even if we're talking about varying viewpoints. We have other videos and shows where we get into a little more with people. And we've tried to get back to our main focus, right? Which is defining the teachings of the text. Still, we try to be accommodating. Not everybody sees every single thing the same way. And for people who are coming out Watchtower, right, it's kind of weird. They're used to like everything being just like black and white, right? There's no division at all. So it's unreasonable, and it only works because of the enforcement by the society, right? Which leads them to this fall. So you have a whole bunch of them who aren't even partaking, yet they claim to be Christian, but they think they're a group that's not even here yet, that has to be good to the people who are identified as Christians in the Bible. And the other group doesn't even know who they are according to Jesus, right? So there's a lot of problems there, and not to mention the fact they've been saying this for about 100 years. And so this is a group that's already after the tribulation that they say hasn't happened? I don't think so. And I don't think they think so. But I don't think they know what to do at this point. So we'll see. Do what you can to help Watchtower people if they're sincere and they're you see that they're kind of stumbled over Watchtower now. It's kind of a tough fall or transition to make when that reality sinks in that things aren't the way you thought, But if they really believe, like you and me, right? If they really have faith in God, I had to redevelop this myself. So again, don't be impatient with people. I'll try not to be anyway. But at the same time, you can't believe for them, right? It's getting to Genesis 19:24. I promise, Everett. I promise. Still, right? At some point, we have to be able to let people decide. We can't worry ourselves and wring our hands over whether other people are going to believe like we do or not, right? If it's not one of the three things, if you're a Christian witness of Jah, it's a lot easier, right? You're all set to give people their space, right? Man, it always feel good, and you kind of have to work together. But hey, you do that with worldly people, right? Why can't you do that with people who believe in Jah, Jesus, you, and me? Treat each other the same way. Yeah, I think we can. So we just don't try hard enough. And we hold each other to such a weird standard of judgment, right? It's like Watchtower, right? You don't agree with what? 1914, 1919, out of here, gone, no hope for you. Gehenna, the worst possible thing, right? How about no? How about those are crazy beliefs to begin with? And even if you want to believe them, you should never be forcing people to believe in that kind of stuff, to the point where you're going to exclude them from association and being a Christian, like actually condemning them is the opposite, right? So we're way beyond all that. Almost, I just don't see how Watchtower is going to transition out of this. They're going to have to continue to deconstruct to a form that is basically nothing like because it's meant to move them into the new earth as the great crowd. This is going to be bad. This is going to be bad because there's no way out for them, right? The only way out is basically Armageddon coming, which is what's so terrible also. You talk to Watchtower people today, they won't help you with anything outside of debating the Trinity or the divine name, right? Because they don't care about the world. Well, they care, but it getting worse is a good thing for Watchtower and its members, right? Because that's proof it's almost over. This is all still possible, right? It keeps the delusion going. They're focusing in on all the negative aspects of our world, which can easily be done. But if you would actually change your perspective, you could still worship God, follow Jesus, practice the golden rule, and participate in your community, your world, if you want to. Certainly not look down on those who try to help. Again, as long as we're not violating someone in an obvious sinful manner that requires a Matthew 18, meaning you, one other, and everybody else, so we can see what the heck is going on here. Short of anything like that, decide who you're going to associate with. Focus on the three things. If you have a question, yeah, we'll talk about it, especially if it's something we haven't talked about in a while. Now, we're going to transition into this Genesis 19. Regarding Genesis 19:24, where it says that, depending on which translation you use, Jehovah or Yahweh, or as I prefer, Ya'ol in English, rain fire down out of heaven from Jehovah, Yahweh, Ya'ol. I've discussed this text elsewhere. Recently, I did a 5-part series on the angels of Jah in Zechariah, where I talk about similar things and where I discuss other accounts like Acts chapter 7, which talks about other Old Testament accounts in addition to Zechariah, and Hebrews 1. So that series plus other videos I've done, like the angel of Jahuah, which is another form of the divine name I use at times in the Old Testament. There's a video by that name where I talk about specific texts, including texts in Genesis. I'm going to do a separate series at some point in the near future about the angels, angels of Jah in Genesis, like the Zechariah series. But I wanted to do a brief video about Genesis 19:24 before that, because I'm not exactly sure when it will come out. And even though I've talked about this text in other videos and in my writings at times, for example, my Jehovah's Witnesses Defended Edition, Chapter 2, I do discuss Genesis 19:24 from a quotation of Dr. Morey's writings. But I don't really get into it in the way I'm going to now or in my future video on the angels of Jah in Genesis. I discuss it more so from the quote in Morey's book in relation to other texts where Morey is trying to argue, well, he is arguing, but I don't believe he successfully does it. And I talk about it in my chapter 2. You can just look up Genesis 19:24 in my scripture index to any of my defended editions. I'm thinking of my 3rd edition right now, but it's in my 2nd as well, maybe my first 2. Either way, when I talk about it in relation to Morey's use of that text, he explicitly quotes Genesis 19:24, refers to it as evidence that there are 2 Jehovahs. He actually says that or writes it. You can see it in the quotation I make when I'm talking about that text in the reference I just gave you. So I mostly in that source focus on that claim, that Morey's claim that there are 2 Jehovahs in Genesis 19:24 is consistent with the Bible, or even consistent with Morey or other Trinitarians, who, as I show in that chapter from my defended editions, elsewhere argue there's only one Jehovah in quoting Deuteronomy 6:4. Now, I have a video where I discuss Deuteronomy 6:4 and other related texts in my Bible in the Trinity and Conflict series. But one God, or the one God of the Bible is not 3 persons, is the title of the video I'm thinking of there. But if you're going to claim that there's one Jehovah and cite Deuteronomy 6:4, to then claim, as Morey does, he explicitly writes 2 Jehovahs. The precedent for 2 Jehovahs is in Genesis 19:24. It's basically the summation of the quote I'm referring to. And then he goes on to cite apocryphal and pseudepigraphal texts, which I also discuss, from Enoch and other texts, which kind of get to the same issue. But again, I mostly address it from the perspective that there are 2 Jehovahs. I don't really get into the details of the immediate context and narrative as it relates to this Jehovah raining fire out of heaven from Jehovah, and the Trinitarian argument that, as Morey uses this text, it relates to what I'm talking about in that chapter and discuss in relation to this text. But so I think the 2 Jehovah's claim openly contradicts their claim elsewhere when it comes to texts like Deuteronomy 6:4. Of course, as we know, they will reinterpret Jehovah in texts like Genesis 19:24 as a person of Jehovah. Person of the Trinity. Trinity being Jehovah. There's one Jehovah, Deuteronomy 6:4. You see, in Deuteronomy 6:4, Jehovah our God is one Jehovah. Trinitarians understand that to be the Trinity. In Genesis 19:24, they understand Jehovah, the divine name is what I'm talking about right now, to be a person of the Trinity, which is why they make the argument Jehovah is raining fire out of heaven from Jehovah. Now, Trinitarians, as everybody knows, and as they say regularly, as Morey says in the quote I'm referring to from my chapter 2 quotation of it, they believe there's one person of the Trinity on earth in Genesis 19:24, raining fire and sulfur out of heaven from another person of the Trinity in heaven. Right? And this relates to the three men or angels that came to visit Abraham and Lot as well. In Genesis 19:24, the angels talking to Lot, or Jehovah, right? The account refers to these angels as Jehovah, but also as angels and as men, just like Zechariah does. So this is why I said, if you watch that series, I believe you'll understand how these angels are identified in these texts from the Old Testament. Why they talk as Jehovah, even though they're sent by Jehovah, they receive words from Jehovah, they pray to Jehovah, right? These are not beings with a human nature like Jesus has on earth or after, according to Trinitarians also. So there's no way they could be equal, members of the Trinity and do these things. Certainly not depend on each other for knowledge, which is what it is the case for the angel of Jehovah and other angels in Zechariah who speak as Jehovah. The angel of Jehovah also uses the exact same words to Satan that Michael uses according to Jude when he's talking to Satan, proving neither one of them are Jehovah and that both of them want Jehovah to rebuke Satan. And yet the account refers to them, at least in Zechariah, as Jehovah. And so some people have a hard time with this. Most recently, I had someone who said, look, I'm with you, but I don't understand this. I'm having a hard time, figuring this out. And, the thing is, one of the reasons I haven't really gotten into this part or idea of the text like I am now, and I will when I get into the broader discussion of angels in Genesis, I just don't see how this text helps people who believe in the Trinity. I never have. That's why my writings, my defended editions, chapter 2, where I discuss Morey's use of this text, allegedly proving two Jehovahs, that's why, to me, if that's what you believe, right, and that's what you would have to believe because that's, according to them, what it says. That's how they're using the text to say there's one Jehovah in heaven and there's one Jehovah on earth. Well, there's a couple problems with that. We already defined one, right? They're using Jehovah in Deuteronomy 6:4 to refer to the Trinity. One God, Trinity. Unless they're going to say that's the Father there, like 1 Corinthians 8:6 says, which is what we believe, right? Not what they believe. So again, either way, I think they're equivocating on the use of Jehovah, right? What the divine name is being used for, to mean, identify. Kind of like they do God. The way they'll use the term God to refer to the Trinity. Excuse me. Talking a lot now. It's what happens when I get going. Talk a lot more when I do these streams and stuff, but it's okay. Excuse me. Right? They use God to refer to the Trinity, and they also use God for persons of the Trinity. When the Bible doesn't use it for either one, not explicitly, and it uses it for the Father, and it also uses it for God's sons. That's it. That's our belief. Done. Okay, but we know we get to Trinity, and then Trinity. So, people get to this Genesis 19:24, and it's like, okay, one Jehovah, two Jehovahs. Okay, so do they believe in two Jehovahs? Well, no, they don't, right? That's what they'll say. Now, Morey actually writes that, but then he explains. See, this is why, again, at least Morey writes it, right? He says two Jehovahs. But what they mean by that is two persons, right? So ask yourself, would Maury have said there are two gods? If you look at the quotation from my chapter 2 where Maury quotes Genesis 19:24, and just look it up. It's the second citation in my index. Maury writes that Genesis 19:24, and Trinitarians argue it proves two Jehovahs, right? But they mean two persons of the Trinity. That's not what it says, though, right? So it's like John 1:1. In the beginning was the Word was with God. And the Word was, they say God. But they don't believe he was God he was with. They identify the God he was with as a person of the Trinity, and him as a person of the Trinity, right? That's not what it says, right? It says he was with God, and he was a God, one of the sons of God that the account in that very chapter of John 1, goes on to define. The glory belongs to an only begotten from a Father, only begotten Son or God. Basically the same thing, because the sons of God are gods. That's what that means, the Hebrew idiom I've talked about before. And in that volume, all editions, I think it is chapter 2 where I talk about it. Either way, Banai Elohim, Jesus is, of course, in our view, the firstborn. But either way, right? So we get to this Genesis 19:24, and people say, well, look, one Jehovah is raining fire down from the other Jehovah. All right, well, you wouldn't say one God is raining fire down from the other God, would you? No, you wouldn't. So you're clearly meaning by Jehovah what you mean by God, a person of the Trinity. Otherwise, you would use God in place of Jehovah, because Jehovah is God, right? Right. Well, we believe that. To you, Jehovah is a Trinity and the divinity, right? The Godhead. And three persons of that same Godhead sharing eternally that nature of the Godhead, which is what makes them Jehovah, equally eternal, right? Bible doesn't teach that. That's the only problem. Let's just go with it, okay? Let's go with this whole concept of the Trinity as you can use the divine name for the eternal Godhead, the Trinity, and you can use it for all three persons of the Trinity. And in Genesis 19:24, you have the second use. You have persons of the Trinity being called Jehovah. That's the only way Trinitarians can understand this text. Am I wrong? Trinitarians, do you want to, if you're here or later, is there another way, Trinitarians, you can understand Genesis 19:24 than that it is one person of Jehovah the Trinity, who is therefore Jehovah, a person of the Trinity, raining fire down from heaven, out of heaven, from another person of the Trinity who is Jehovah. The Trinity is also Jehovah, but this person is therefore also Jehovah, being a share of the eternal nature. So you have two persons sharing the eternal nature, one on earth, raining fire down from the Jehovah person of the Trinity in heaven. I'm positive that's how Orthodox Trinitarians understand this text. But you're free to correct me if you'd like, now or later. Okay. So we've accepted this second of two uses for Jehovah, meaning a person of the Trinity, which is the first use of Jehovah, the Deuteronomy 6 Jehovah, basically. I believe, again, Trinitarians are equivocating here because they don't see that as just the Father. I see it as the Trinity there, Deuteronomy 6:4. So then we get to Genesis 19, which is before that anyway. Either way, still Trinity, right? So you got the one person raining down fire from the other, right? That's how Trinitarians see it. Well, fundamentally, outside of all of this Trinitarian conceptualization, right? And that's really the thing, right? I mean, the Bible doesn't present the metaphysics of God in these Trinitarian ways. These are later concepts, whether Trinitarians want to argue that they're biblical or not. They're not articulated in the Bible, like one God the Father, okay? This idea that Jehovah can represent an eternal Godhead or Trinity, but also be specific to individual persons of that Godhead, and there still only be one Jehovah, Deuteronomy 6:4, right? So here we are, Deuteronomy, Genesis 19:24. Let's go to that text actually in the Bible Hub. But basically, right, they see Trinity. They see the persons. So it's fundamentally, I believe, read into the text. I believe it ignores the context of Genesis 19, which I've discussed before, and which is similar to Zechariah, like I talked about earlier, which we'll get to again, that shows how these angels act and operate as Jehovah, even though the text explicitly identifies them, in this case, as men and as angels. And the angel that we're going to be reading about, or that in Genesis 19 is talking to Lot, right? The one who's on earth in Trinitarian's view. Right, we're going to read that. Well, let's just get to it. We'll go to it first. So the angel's talking to Lot. I'm going to bring you guys up here. We'll start in 18. Bring that up. Let's see. Okay, we'll start there. We're going to use the Bible Hub. We'll start actually a little earlier. Genesis 19:15. Let me bring you guys up. So Trinitarians want us to believe that in Genesis 19:24, we have one person on earth, as I said, one person in heaven, both called Jehovah. One's raining fire down from heaven out of the other one. And they believe that that shows that the Trinity is biblical, right? Of course, again, we're allowing all this conceptualization, right? And I'm even allowing, in this case, things that are not in the text, but I'll get to that in a moment. And I don't mean just the Trinitarian stuff not in the text, like, well, specifically, Genesis 19:24 does not say anywhere and in any way that Jehovah is on earth at all. So what I believe has happened, and I'm going to show right now has happened, is Trinitarians who argue that there's one Jehovah in heaven and one on earth, and one's raining fire down from the one out of heaven. I'm going to show that not only is Jehovah not on earth at all in Genesis 19:24, but what Trinitarians are doing is conflating narratives, okay? Now, I'm going to keep this specific to Lot. When we get to my broader multi-part Zechariah-like series on the angels of Jah in Genesis, we'll go back earlier into Genesis 18 and consider the account with Abraham and the angels there as well. But I don't think we need to, in order to provide this kind of briefer clip on Genesis 19:24, because that's really the text, right? And it involves what happens right after the angel is with Lot. So if we pick that up right here, okay, we're going to read this all the way to Genesis 19:24, and I'm going to show you not only is Jehovah not said to be on earth in Genesis 19:24, it specifically says he's in heaven. It doesn't say he's on earth. And I'm going to show you that Trinitarians are conflating the narratives and not telling you. They're doing what they often do. They'll read, like in Psalm 102, excuse me. they'll often claim that Lord there, quoted in the Greek version or Paul's version, depending on which it is, that uses Lord, which is the same Lord of the Psalm 110:1 Lord, that is not Jehovah in the quoted text that immediately follows the quotation of Psalm 102 in Hebrews 1. Trinitarians will often claim, the Hebrew, they'll read the Hebrew text first because it's clear it's Jehovah, but they don't explain to you, like I point out in my response to Dr. White, recent video I did on Psalm 102, because he did one too. They don't explain to you that the Greek version Paul's quoting, or the author of Hebrews is quoting, is different from the Hebrew. They just conflate the versions. It's a little different than conflating the narrative, but they do it. It's a similar deception or ignorance, right? But it's either a learned deception or a known deception, right? They're intentionally omitting the fact that the author of Hebrews 1 is quoting the Greek version of Psalm 102, which is different from the Hebrew in several key respects, not only the quote text, but the immediately preceding verse where the Hebrew uses God and the Greek doesn't. So, and it's very clear why the author of Hebrews is using it, again, because he immediately quotes Psalm 110:1. So we know which Lord he's talking about, which is the Lord of the Greek text, not Jehovah, the Hebrew text. Now we get to Genesis 19:24. So this happens, everyone. And what ends up happening, as you're going to see in a moment, Trinitarians will conflate these narratives. They not only read into these terms, Jehovah can be the Trinity, Godhead, also people of the Trinity. So you can have two Jehovahs, but it's really two people, one Trinity, right? It's all read into the text. Of course, conceptually, this is later doctrine, though. It's how they understand the text. We don't believe that's what the text is teaching us. It's not that you can't come up with a doctrine that you think makes sense of it. We're asking, okay, well, is that what the word Jehovah means? No, it doesn't appear to ever mean a Godhead or a person of a Godhead. It always means an actual God, an actual individual spirit being. Yeah, an eternal spirit, the Father, one God. There are others who are called gods, just as there are many gods and many lords in heaven and on earth, done and done. Trinitarians go into this whole other way of understanding terms like God and Jehovah that we don't have to grant at all when it comes to Genesis 19:24. So that's why it is appropriate to say to Maury or others who want to say there's two Jehovahs here, but it's not two Jehovahs, it's two persons of a Trinity. So it allows us to say there are two Jehovahs, one there and one here, even though we believe they're everywhere usually. Right? This is so weird how Trinitarians are. Either way, they'll say, yeah, there's one person up there, one down here, each Jehovah, two Jehovahs, one Jehovah, Trinity. Yeah, no. What is happening is they're conflating things. Okay? And I'm going to show you that right now. And they're basically, well, the conflation involves the addition of the being on earth in Genesis 19:24. In addition to all the Trinitarian reading back into it stuff, right? Using Jehovah to refer to the Godhead, using Jehovah to refer to a person of the Godhead. That's what they're supposed to be showing us the Bible teaches. Not reading the Bible in light of things they're assuming but haven't shown the Bible teaches. Again, it's circular arguing all over the place, right? They're constantly assuming they have to, right? We don't have to do that. We've talked about this all before, but let's go with it. Okay, we're here to kind of just move past a lot of this assuming your doctrine stuff. It's critical, right? We already know, right? It's obvious. This is the big problem for them. But I think even if you grant, well, I wouldn't grant their Trinitarianism, but what I'm saying is, let's just move past that. I don't even see that they have a foundation for claiming what they say is in the text. I don't believe the text says anything about Jehovah being on earth in Genesis 19:24. And I believe the only way they can get that out of the text is by conflating the narratives. Ready? Go. Genesis 19:15, New International Version. Excuse me. With the coming of dawn, the angels urged Lot, hurry, take your wife and your 2 daughters who are here, or you will be swept away when the city is punished. So very clearly, you have angels. 16, when he hesitated, I'm talking about Lot, the men, talking about the angels, grasped his hand and the hands of his wife and his 2 daughters. Right? So obviously angels in human form. Like when they came and the Sodomites tried to, sodomize them. Led them to safety out of the city. For the Lord, right? Morally bankrupt representation of the divine name right there. For Jehovah, Ja'ol, was merciful to them. Okay, so what does this tell us, everybody? We know for a fact that the angels, as men, took Lot and his family out of the city. But the text says in verse 16 that it was Jehovah, Ja'ol, who was merciful to them. So does this not clearly show us? And if it doesn't, just tell me. I believe, though, it's very clear this shows us that the angels, once again, are the agents, right? They're referred to as Jehovah, but they're not Jehovah. We saw this all throughout Zechariah. It's from Genesis 18 at least forward, all throughout Genesis. Jehovah, according to Jesus in John chapter 5, we'll read it later, or you can check it on your own. I believe it's verse 27 or 37. He says, you have the Jews' God, the one whom the Jews say is their God. That's from John 8. But in John 5, he's talking about the same one, the Father. The one whom the Jews say is their God is the Father in John 8. And in John 5, he says they haven't heard or seen the voice of the Father ever. Okay, so if in John 8, Jesus says, the one who you say is your God is his Father, the one who sent him. And in John 5, he tells him, you've never heard his voice or seen his shape. And in John 1:18, no one has seen God at any time. The only begotten God, his Son, has explained him to us. Then I don't see how we could make the argument that anyone has ever seen God in any of these accounts. It's always the angels. Even in Exodus 3, when Moses is getting the law everywhere on Mount Sinai. Acts 7 says it was angels. Jesus says we haven't seen or heard the Father's voice ever at any time. I don't think he's just talking to those Jews right then and there. And if he is, John 1:18 says no one has seen God at any time. Lot and Abraham saw all 3 of these angels as men. So that doesn't seem to be consistent with the idea that no one has seen God at any time. If you want us to believe that there's God on earth that Abraham and Lot are interacting with, talking to, seeing, is spoken of as Jehovah God on earth, how could it be that we haven't seen God at any time then? God is even said to have revealed his glory to Moses. God ascended off the altar to Manoah in front of Manoah and his wife, and they said, it's God we've seen. Because it's an angel. It's the angel of Ja'ol. It's always, in every account, the Son of God or one of the sons of God. Whether you accept that or not, I believe this is consistent with that the angels are seen as Jehovah. They're not actually Jehovah. You want to believe that, then again, I think as I discussed in my Zechariah series, you run into problems with your own arguments usually when you try to claim that Jesus can't be an angel according to Hebrews 1. Because you're claiming he is an angel in Genesis and in Zechariah and elsewhere. So It's one problem after another when you try to read your doctrine into these texts. That's why that's why it never ends. That's why we will always be asking this question. Genesis 19:24. Are there two Jehovahs? Is it Trinity? Or is it just Jehovah raining fire down from Jehovah who is in heaven? Because the Bible actually speaks and is written in ways that don't match how we talk several thousand years later. That's why in Genesis 4, like Betsy often points out, you have Lamech singing to Lamech. It's just the way the Bible's written at times in ways that people like Trinitarians who don't have any basis for their doctrine in the scriptures try to invent a way to connect it, right? So we get Jehovah raining fire out of heaven from Jehovah. Trinitarians say one Jehovah's on earth, one's in heaven. Trinity. Genesis 19:17. As soon as they had brought them out, talking about the angels who are men, bringing Lot and his family out, they said, flee for your lives, don't look back, and don't stop anywhere in the plain. Flee to the mountains, or you'll be swept away. Genesis 19:18. But Lot said to them, no, my lords, please. Talking to the angels as men, already read it. That doesn't seem to matter to Trinitarians, though, because angels can be eternal to them, not eternal to them. They're coming up with all, or they believed for a long time things that just aren't taught in the Bible, but that allow them to be consistent with their doctrine, right? Telling us things the text doesn't say. Pretty much everything, right? When it comes to the Trinity, it's not what the Bible teaches. They know that, so they just read it in light of the Trinity. It says God, well, that's the Trinity, or Godhead, or one of the persons. Right? Well, when it's talking about one of the sons of God, that's false God. False God. And there's no other gods. No. Bible says there's other gods, so I know. But there's only one God, Trinity. And three persons of one God. It's not stated that way in the Bible. The Bible does state that one God is one person and refers to him as a he, him. But we have all these plurals that we misinterpret in the Old Testament in ways that aren't consistent with the Greek translation, all this stuff, right? Even our own beliefs, because we say there's one God, but we see the plural of God in the Old Testament, Elohim, is somehow consistent with Trinity, even though it would have to mean gods if it's a real plural. But we have these things called intensifying plurals, plurals of majesty, but that Trinitarians don't want to believe in because they want to believe in it as Trinity, right? Because everything's read in light of Trinity. That's why when you all get, some of you, I shouldn't say all of us, right? I would include me too, because I've gone through this as well. But I've reached a point where I realize, you can spend a lot of time getting into these metaphysical thoughts and concepts, Trinity, right? Once you go outside of what the Bible says explicitly, or can be shown to mean historically and contextually during the times it was written, not according to hundreds of years later ideas, okay? They're either in the text or they're later, they're not in the text. We don't read the Bible outside of the Bible or the time periods of the Bible. So when we do this, we don't see Trinity, okay? But we're getting to Genesis 19:24. Is that going to show us Trinity? Let's find out. Your servant has found favor in your eyes. You've shown me great kindness, sparing my life. I can't flee to the mountains. This disaster will overtake me. It's too far, right? Is that not what Lot is saying here? I can't make it. You're asking me to go too far. So what does the angel or angels say, right? He's addressing them. They're there as men. They've come to take him out of the city, him and his family. So then one of the angels responds, look, here's a town near enough to run to, and it's small. Or I'm sorry, this is actually Lot continuing. Let me flee to it. It is very small, isn't it? Then my wife will be spared. 19:21. He said to him, very well, I will grant this request too. I will not overthrow the town you speak of. but flee there quickly, because I cannot do anything until you reach it. That is why the town was called Zoar. All right. Now, let's stop for a moment. So what do we have here? We clearly have an account where angels as men came to get Lot out of the city. They take Lot and his family, and Lot starts to panic. Doesn't think he can make it out of there in time, right? So he appeals and asks whom it appears is an angel. It's kind of undefined, right? It seems to be one of the angels who are there with him. There's no other indication someone else is here but them right now. Lot says, let me go to this town, okay? I can run to it. It's not too far, but it's not like right there, right? He's got to run to it. Let's go back to it a moment. The account, the way it was described. Is a town near enough to run to, a small village nearby, a city near enough to flee to. All right, so we don't have like a clear indication, but let's just say it would take him. How long do you think it would take Lot and his wife to get to where he's referring? Without speculating too much, right? Let's say 30 minutes to an hour. Can we all kind of accept that this town isn't like right there? He's going to have to run for about 30 minutes to an hour. By run, I mean kind of like move quickly. Does anyone think it would be less than 30 minutes? Let's just say it would take them 15 minutes, okay? Let's say this town that Lot wants to go to because he doesn't think he can get away in time is 15 minutes away. I doubt anyone would argue. 10 minutes, okay? I'll even say 5. You know, in the spirit of this account, I should probably stick with 10, right? I'll say 1 minute. Let's say it took Lot 1 minute. Right, that's not really realistic, though. All right, I'm going to make a point here, just why I'm kind of overdoing it. But just to keep in the realm of reality, let's just say 15 minutes. I don't think anyone could argue. It's going to take Lot at least 15 minutes and his family to get to this village right here. And he's talking about. And again, I don't think it would matter anyway. I'm going to go down to 1 minute. You'll see why. But I mean, realistically, I think we're talking 15 minutes to an hour. And it says right here in verse 22, I cannot do anything until you reach it. All right. Now, does that sound like Jehovah to you? Let's take a look at what the Hebrew says. Hurry, escape there. For cannot I do anything until you arrive there. Look at the Greek. We'll just go to the multi where it's all right there. Where's that multi? There it is. We were at 22. Yeah. I should have brought this one up earlier. I usually do bring this one up where we have the Greek right across. U gar dinesamai poiesai pragma heos tuse elthein eke. For not I am able to do anything until you arrive at that place, you arrive there. Not I am able, I don't have the power. U dine samai. I'm not able to do anything until you get there. Poye sai. I'm not able to do anything until you get there. That doesn't sound like Jehovah to me. No. That sounds like someone who's limited, who doesn't have the power. It literally says that in both the Hebrew and the Greek. I don't have the power to do anything. Not I choose not to do anything. I'm not able. It's not possible, right? Because why? Because Jehovah, the real Jehovah I'm here representing, has already told me what to do. You're going to flee to that town, and I'm not going to do anything until you get there. I'm not able to do anything until you get there. That's what it says. I believe that alone disqualifies this angel from being Jehovah. Just like in John chapter 5, verse 19. But, Trinitarians like to say he's man there. They attribute that to his humanity. We know how they like to play. Of course, we've dealt with that numerous times, but this is not the case here, right? This is an angelic pre-incarnate, in their view, person of the Trinity. But this, whom the text identifies as an angel, one of the angels that came to get Lot, he says he's not able, can't do anything until Lot gets there to the city that has been designated. Okay? So I think right there, consistent with these being actual angels, and even though they speak to and are spoken of as Jehovah, because that's who they're there to represent, consistent with all these other texts, Acts 7, all of it. But when we're going to look at this closely, right? Trinitarians are telling us, verse 24, it's coming up. They're saying you got one person of the Trinity called Jehovah in heaven. Another person of the Trinity called Jehovah on earth. Now, in this text, in Genesis 18 and 19, of course, we're focused on basically 19, 22 through 24. We're just reading a little of the context, because I think that's all that you need for this issue. We already know these are angels. It already explicitly said that. Verse 1 of chapter 19 explicitly says the beings that Abraham and Lot have been talking to are angels, but they're spoken to and speak as Jehovah. Okay? This is what throws Trinitarians. They don't understand how that can happen. See, we understand how that can happen because that's what happens. You understand the difference? We don't come to the text with a concept of what can happen. They do. The only thing that can happen when a Trinitarian comes to these texts is the Trinity. No matter what. When someone like you and me, or who doesn't believe in the Trinity, comes to these texts, that's not what you're going to come away with. Ever. You're going to see these as angels spoken to and speaking as God or Jehovah. Now, maybe you'll find that a little strange in some sense, but outside of just reading certain verses in isolation, like verse 24, I mean, I agree. It's again, these are ancient texts. They're not meant to be written the same way you and I read or write. Translationally, they should be comprehensible, and I believe they are. But again, like I mentioned earlier, Genesis chapter 4, you do have this usage where you have a double reference in a way that isn't meant to mean there's more than one, whether it's Lamech or Jehovah. Now, the question that we're really focused on is, does Genesis 19:24 teach two Jehovahs? Whether you understand it as a Trinity or not, okay? For now, we'll just set aside, like I said earlier, I want to kind of explain, though, what's going on with the Trinitarian conceptually here. Let's just try to set that aside and answer the question, does Genesis 19:24 teach there's one Jehovah in heaven and another on earth? Whether you believe in it in a Trinitarian sense or not, is that what it teaches? Okay? Does it actually say there's a Jehovah in heaven and a Jehovah on earth, and one Jehovah rains fire down from the other? Is that what it actually says? Interpret how you interpret it aside. It's coming up. We know, we read it earlier, starting from verse 15, these are angels at this point. We know that also from verse 1 that we didn't read, but that's part of this account. We're connected to it. We now know from this verse that this angel, whoever it is that Lot's talking to, it clearly seems to be one of the angels that came to get him. This angel can't do anything until Lot gets to this city. I don't believe that's consistent with this angel being a member of the eternal Godhead Trinity. I believe that God would always be able to, at any time, do whatever he wants. And he would just tell him to flee to the city. This is additional. Right? This is in the Greek and the Hebrew, consistent with Jesus when he's on earth, John 5, and elsewhere, John 8. I believe this additional admission by this angelic being proves it's not an eternal person, omniscient, omnipowerful, right, omnipotent member of the Trinity. Let's move on, though, and see what verse 24 actually states. First, verse 23, by the time Lot reached Zoar, the sun had risen over the land. Okay. So again, I'm thinking probably closer to the hour, maybe even longer, right? But we're trying not to use our time frame here as the key aspect of what this text means, the verse 24 coming up. And I don't think we need to, right? So while I do see that probably it took Lot several hours, even though it says he ran there and he could flee there, I think it probably took him more than an hour to get there with his family. Either way, up to several hours. We're using basically 15 minutes, okay? So it's not really a question as to what our conclusions are in relation to this time it took for Lot to get to this city. Our conclusions are not tied to it. And I'll explain why right after verse 24. Then the Lord rained down burning sulfur on Sodom and Gomorrah from the Lord out of the heavens. Let's just take a look at a few others. English Standard. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah sulfur and fire from the Lord out of heaven. New American Standard. Then the Lord rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. King James. And the Lord rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. This part in basically all these texts we've read so far, these English translations, it seems to be they're all basically saying the exact same thing, right? The Lord rained upon Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from the Lord out of heaven. Minor differences in wording aside, they're all basically saying that. Net Bible. Then the Lord rained down fire, sulfur and fire on Sodom and Gomorrah. It was sent down from the sky by the Lord. It's a little different. American Standard. Then Jehovah rained upon Sodom and upon Gomorrah brimstone and fire from Jehovah out of heaven. Let's, in fact, I may not have the NWT up right here. Okay, so now let's go ahead and look at the Hebrew. We'll bring it up so you can all kind of see it and we'll read it together. They have different ways of looking at this, but let's just look at it in this way. I'll read it as you can see it. Then this version uses Yahweh, so I'll just use Yahweh. Then Yahweh rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from Yahweh out of the heavens. All right. Now, as we read in the prior verses, right? What did we read immediately prior to this? Right, starting in verse, we just go just 2. We'll just go to verse 22. I don't want you to forget, right? Remember, the angels came and took Lot and his family out of the city. Lot then says, hey, I can't make it. Let me go to that city over there. I can run to that. I can get to that one. Then whoever it was Lot was talking to, which according to what we actually have in the account, there's no reason to think it's anyone other than at least one of those angels that are actually with him and bringing him out of the city, right? Doesn't say anything else or that he's talking to anyone else but one of those angels. Then one of those angels, or this is again Lot, he's saying hurry, or no, I'm sorry, this is one of the angels. It's Lot right before this. He says, let me go to that city. And the angel, one of the angels he's talking to, who came to take him out, says, hurry, escape there, for cannot I do anything until you arrive there? And then that's why the name of the city was called Zoar. That's verse 22. And then verse 23, when the sun had risen upon the earth, then Lot entered Zoar. Okay, so he got to the city. So how much time passed between when the angel he's talking to in verses 20 and 21, before the angel in verse 22 says, hurry, get over there? How much time passed between when the angel says, okay, go to Zoar? It wasn't called Zoar yet, but that's why it came to me. I'm going to refer to it that way. How much time passed between that, verse 22, and right here? Angel says, go to that city. I can't do anything until you get there. Verse 23, when the sun had risen upon the earth, Lot entered Zoar. Okay, so some time passed, right? I don't care if you think it was 1 minute, which we know it was more than that. 15 minimum, but it's even that, right? 30 minutes, an hour, several hours. No matter what, Lot had to run with his family or quickly flee to this city. Some time passed between when the angel said, I can't do anything until you get there, and him getting there. We don't know how long. Probably an hour or more. Either way, how long would it take if let's say you are Jehovah on earth here. Remember, we're kind of going with, in part, the Trinitarian ideas, concepts, because even though we don't grant them their assumptions, we're trying to understand verse 24, if it at all possible is consistent with their doctrine. They say it's two Jehovahs there, one person in the Trinity and another person in the Trinity, raining fire one down from the other. One's on earth, the other's in heaven. In this account here, leading up to verse 24, which we'll get to again, we have one of the angels who's there to take Lot out of the city that Lot's talking to, telling Lot, okay, go to that city. I can't do anything till you get there. Let's assume that angel is in fact Jehovah. We could even if you want, assume it's a member of the Trinity, right? This isn't meant to be, this is a hypothetical, but it's going to make a point. I'm making a point. Right? I'm going to show that even Trinitarians would agree. Let's just assume this angel is Jehovah. And even if you want, as I said, a member of the Trinity. Talking to Lot, tells Lot, go to that city, can't do anything. We'll let that go for now. Can't do anything till you get there. Takes Lot at least an hour or so to get there, even if it's 15 minutes, again, doesn't matter, because why, Trinitarians? How long would it take for Jehovah to go from earth to heaven? I think we actually know the time it took for Lot to go from speaking with the angel to Zoar, more so than we know how fast it would be that Jehovah could go from earth to heaven. According to you guys, he's everywhere. So he'd already be in heaven and on earth. And so it, in one sense, doesn't even make any sense. But either way, we already know that. Does the text say what you say it says? Well, right before we get to it, because we're in verse 23 right here in this version, right? Bible Hub. Again, are you really going to argue that Jehovah on earth couldn't immediately be in heaven? Or wouldn't already be in heaven? Right? I mean, it's, again, kind of a weird question, but I think you would agree that it wouldn't take him longer than it would take Lot to get to Zoar. I'll tell you that for sure. Yeah, I'm pretty confident of that. All right, nothing in the Bible indicates otherwise. All right, so if that's the case, if the angel who is Jehovah, according to Trinitarians, could get to heaven faster than Lot could get to Zoar, why do Trinitarians think that that angel who they identify as Jehovah is on earth in verse 24? Well, here's what it says, reading the corresponding Hebrew in the text analysis version of the Bible Hub. Then Yahweh rained on Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And right here also, I do want to point out this use of this wa, right? Oh, I'm sorry. Right here below my picture in the Hebrew column, right below that, you can see, remember, Hebrew is read from right to left. So on the far right, even though below that it's translating as Yahweh. Well, I mean, even in the text, it doesn't say that, right? It says more like, well, we won't get into the pointing because it doesn't really make it explicit in this version here. And it has the wa connected to it. So Yahweh is fine. Again, I don't want to get off on it. But I just noted it doesn't really say that even in the vowel pointing used, right? The final, you can see the final part of the divine name here. It would be, well, in our view, ol. But even according to them, I'd be wa. Yehovah, not Yahweh. That's what that vowel pointing at the bottom below the wa means there. But this wa here is not part of the divine name. That's a wa that typically means and, or it makes connections between events or transitions. Here it's translated then. So it transitions things. All right. Verses 22 and 23 that we've just been focusing on clearly stated that Lot was talking to one of the angels that came to take him out of the city and asked to go to the city that was called Zoar. The angel said, go, flee there. I can't do anything till you get there. Took him at least an hour or more. We'll even grant 15 minutes. And everyone agrees that that angel, even if you consider Jehovah a person of the Trinity, could immediately get to heaven if he wasn't there already. Certainly before Lot got to Zoar. Trinitarians want us to believe that in verse 24, there's a Jehovah or Yahweh on earth, raining fire down from a Jehovah person of the Trinity in heaven. That's not what it says. We not only have the time difference, minimum 15 minutes, but more realistically an hour or more, from when Lot left the angel and fled to Zoar, and verse 24, fire coming down out of heaven, we clearly have enough time for that angel, even if you think it's Jehovah, and especially if you think it's Jehovah, to go to heaven. Verse 24 starts out with a transitional use of wa. Then, after Lot got to Zoar, after the time it took him to travel with his family, even to a nearby village, probably an hour or so or more, maybe less. After that, verse 24 says, Yahweh rained on Sodom and Gomorrah brimstone and fire from Yahweh out of the heavens. Now, I'm using this version because it gives a pretty good corresponding English to Hebrew right across the screen. And even if you don't know Hebrew, you can clearly see the word earth is not used in this text. The word land is not used in this text. Right? Eretz. No. We have a transition into an entirely different account. Well, it's connected with the preceding, but again, Trinitarians are conflating the angel Lot was talking to on earth in verses 20, 22, and 21 and 22, 20 and through 22 at a minimum. They want to conflate that with verse 24, when it very clearly showed there was a time difference, that the events changed, the narrative changed. It went from Lot talking to the angel, one of the angels that came to take him out of the city, to him fleeing for an undefined period of time, minimum 15 minutes, but realistically an hour more, and the angel waiting for that to happen before he'll do anything. Then we get to verse 24. Lot is in Zoar, however long that took. Trinitarians assume that angel, whom they identify as a person of the Trinity, just stayed right there. Just stayed right there on the earth where he was talking to Lot. Yeah, they're positive of that. They're absolutely 100% positive that the Jehovah angel who came to get Lot out of the city and who said Lot could flee to Zoar, and who can't do anything until Lot gets to Zoar, 100% positive that angel is Jehovah on the earth talking to Lot, and didn't leave that spot when Lot fled to Zoar. Trinitarians are absolutely 100% positive that angel who they identify as Jehovah, a person of the Trinity, stayed right there on earth. Yeah. Positive. So they just pretend there isn't any time difference between Lot talking to that angel right there on that spot where the angel had to stay, 100% positive, and Lot fleeing to a city with his family. The angel stayed right there on earth, didn't go anywhere. Positive. Trinitarians absolutely certain. Only the actual verse that they cite doesn't say that. The actual verse, verse 24 in Genesis 19, that talks about Yahweh raining fire out of heaven from Yahweh, happens after Lot talks to the angel, whom Trinitarians identify as a Jehovah eternal angel, person of the Trinity, and the angel says, flee to the city. Can't do anything till you get there. They just assume the angel stays there on earth. After all this travel, Lot has to take off and go to that city. The account uses a transition, wa. Then Yahweh rained fire and sulfur down out of heaven from Yahweh. The verse does not say Yahweh is on earth. There's no reason to assume Yahweh is on earth. There's not even any reason to assume Yahweh, Jehovah, Yahweh, in this verse is the angel talking to Lot. You know why? Because we know for a fact that that angel was an angel. It says the angels came to get them out of the city. Trinitarians say it's an eternal angel, Trinity. Even if you believe that, this account does not say one of the angels or one of the men that came to get Lot out of the city that was on the earth with him before he fled to Zoar. This verse does not say one of those angels is the one that is in heaven or on earth. Now, I believe that the angel is representing Yahweh, Jehovah, Yahweh. My point is, the account previously that we read from verse 15 explicitly said they were angels and men as they materialized to get Lot and his family out of the city. Then in verse 24, see, Trinitarians want to conflate. They want to attach verses 22 and 21, 20 through 23 especially, because that's where this angel's talking to Lot. And Lot's on earth, of course, right? The angels came to pull him out of the city. So the angels are on earth. That's why Trinitarians say that in verse 24, the first Yahweh, this one right here, then Yahweh reigned on Sodom and Gomorrah. They assume this Yahweh is that angel man that Lot's talking to in the preceding verses. So they ignore the time difference between the ending of the account where Lot talked to that angel, went to Zoar, the transition to verse 24 made clear by Hua and the events I just described. They ignore all that. So that there's no idea of a time separation or a narrative break at all in your mind. They conflate the accounts so that the angel talking to Lot is this Yahweh raining fire and sulfur down from Yahweh out of heaven. It doesn't say that. In fact, it explicitly doesn't say angel or man, which the account where Lot is talking to that angel man, that's what it says they are. Now, Trinitarians may say, well, the angel says he can't do anything. So it's the angel raining the fire. So the angel has to be Yahweh here. I actually believe that is the case. My point is, it doesn't say that, does it? It doesn't identify it as the angel or the man. We would both be interpreting Yahweh or Jehovah here, no matter how you look at it, if that's what you wanted to do. But the fact is, it doesn't say either one is on earth. Whether you see it like I do as an angel representing Yahweh And so therefore being the one who's waiting till Lot gets there, but can't do anything till he gets there because he's not Yahweh, but he has the power granted by Yahweh to destroy the city. So he's referred to that way. It's real simple for us, right? We'll talk about more too, but whether you see it as that or a person of the Trinity, it doesn't say either one is on earth. So it doesn't matter. You can have your interpretation that this is a person of the Trinity all you want. I won't grant it. I don't think it's correct. I will disprove it using the Bible. But it doesn't matter. Because it doesn't say there's a person on earth and a person in heaven. It simply does what we see elsewhere. For example, Genesis 4 regarding Lamech. It just refers to Yahweh raining on Sodom and Gomorrah, sulfur and fire from Yahweh out of the heavens. The only location, Genesis 19:24, attributes to Yahweh in the first or second instance is in heaven, out of the heavens. There is nothing in verse 24 that explicitly or implies the first Yahweh or second Yahweh, which I believe are the same Yahweh, or an angel representing Yahweh. But even the text as it's written doesn't do anything different than Genesis 4 with regard to Lamech singing to Lamech, because that's how the Bible was written in ancient times. It wasn't written the same way we talk or write. We try to translate it, so when you get these double references, whether it's Yahweh or Lamech, you have to interpret it right. You don't assume doctrines from later time to do so. You simply look at it for what it says. It actually doesn't say angel or man, so anything you add here is an interpretation. It may be correct, but to require people to believe this is a person of the Trinity on earth not only assumes the Trinity, it adds to the text words that are not there, which is why Trinitarians have to conflate the narrative of Lot speaking to the angel before going to Zoar and Yahweh raining fire from Yahweh after Lot arrives at Zoar, because it's the only way they can read one of the Yahwehs being on earth in verse 24, which again not only assumes that Yahweh is an angel or man from the prior narrative, but even granting that, it assumes that angel or man or person of the Trinity is on earth raining fire down out of heaven from another Yahweh. That's not what it says. It just refers to Yahweh or Jehovah raining fire and sulfur out of heaven from Jehovah. In other words, he's bringing it out of heaven from himself, as I see it. Or if you want to see it as the angel representing him, that's also possible. But that's an interpretation, as I said. Same with Trinity. So we just eliminate that entirely and go with what it says. It says Jehovah, Yahweh, rains fire out of heaven from Jehovah, Yahweh. It does not say anywhere either one of those Yahweh, Jehovah, Yahos is on the earth. You're assuming that and using that to create a contradiction, or at least an equivocation, between what Jehovah, Yahweh, Yahweh means in Deuteronomy 6:4 and what it means in these accounts. Which, if it doesn't refer to the Father, the one God of the Bible, only otherwise ever means one of his sons are using his name or being given his name to use to represent him. For more on that, see my series on Zechariah and the angels of Jah in it. We'll get to Genesis another time, but now we're going to look at a few other things before we partake. Thank you all for joining me. Hopefully that was helpful. I get a lot of questions at times, Trinitarian stuff. Some of it I don't mind. quite honestly, things like Genesis 19:24, I don't understand why it's such a problem for people. Other than just reading a little different, like Genesis 4 with Lamech, right? No one seems to have a problem with Lamech singing to Lamech. So why do you have a problem with Jehovah raining fire from himself out of heaven? Just because it says Jehovah rains fire out of heaven from Jehovah, that doesn't mean there's two Jehovahs in a Trinitarian sense. And it doesn't mean, even if you accept the Trinity, either one of those Jehovahs is on earth. It's a conflation of the narratives, a failure to recognize the separation in the accounts in terms of the time it took Lot to get to Zoar, assumes the Trinity, and assumes that the Yahweh, the first Yahweh in Genesis 19:24, is an angel or a man who came to get Lot out of the city, and it assumes that that angel, man, or person of the Trinity is on earth, which it does not say. And that's why they conflate. It's a lot easier to get you to believe that one of the Jehovah's is on earth without talking about the separation in the accounts, right? But that's what makes it a little frustrating for me at times. I just read the account, right? I can tell immediately, okay, well, it doesn't say either one of those are on earth right there. And clearly, the angel's waiting for Lot to get to Zoar. But why is everybody assuming that even if this angel is a member of the Trinity, that it's on earth? There's not only no reason to assume the angel's a member of the Trinity, because it says it can't do anything, which a member of the Trinity in the pre-incarnate state wouldn't. You can't say that, right? You're omnipotent. What are you talking about? Can't do anything. Doesn't make any sense. And Trinitarians want to say, well, that's just how the angel talks. Well, then that's what we talk about when we're talking in verse 24. That's just how the Bible talks. Yeah, so you can just lie about anything or make an excuse for anything when it suits you, right? Wrong. How about you don't add words like one of the Yahwehs is on earth? And let's see how good you are at interpreting verse 24 then. How about you don't assume that Yahweh means the Trinity or Godhead or a member of the Trinity, and prove that instead. We'll see how good you do, okay? Let's see you not conflate the narratives and avoid an entire section that includes a time that would require likely an hour or more for Lot to get to a city. And so you could actually explain that to people when you talk about the account and try to make sense of it, how that angel, even if it's Jehovah, a person of the Trinity, couldn't just go to heaven. Yeah, just go to heaven, like verse 24 says, and rain fire down out of heaven from yourself, which account identifies similar to Lamech in referential sense. Jehovah raining fire down out of heaven from Jehovah. Because it's not Jehovah talking, right? It's the account describing what's happening. Jehovah rained fire down out of heaven. So the account just doesn't want to leave it like that. It's actually fire from Jehovah out of heaven. A little bit different than just saying out of heaven, right? In the book of Revelation, it describes bowls of fire there before Jehovah's throne. Fire could come from a lot of places, I imagine, in heaven. The account specifies in this case that the fire came from Jehovah out of heaven. That's how angry he was. The fire, you can imagine the intensity of that fire. Special divine fire. So I don't even think there's a problem, right? I mean, Trinitarians are just not looking at this account. So they just conflate it, add like concepts and words, Trinity and on earth, and then we're stuck dealing with it, right? We're stuck dealing with it, and people get bewildered or confused about it, and we have to take time and sit here and go over all this stuff, right? Which I'm happy to do if it's necessary, but all I did was read the account. I didn't have to know Hebrew. I didn't have to know Greek. So I don't understand it at times why more effort isn't made by some of you. Why aren't you trying a little bit harder? I understand if some things are they're technical, grammatically, or, you really spent some time with it. But I don't think you really needed me to show that there's a conflation of a narrative here, or that there's an assumption about Trinitarianism going on all over the place, or especially, right, since it's such a big part of Trinitarians' argument that this person of Jehovah, this angel Jehovah, is on earth, raining fire down out of heaven from another Jehovah in heaven, another person of the Trinity, they assume. I would think, especially since that's how they emphasize their argument, it's very precise in terms of there's one Jehovah person of the Trinity on earth, right? Another Jehovah person of the Trinity in heaven, right? That's how they very clearly explain it. Only that's not what it says. So my recommendation is you not only look for the conceptual traps they lay, where it concerns their equivocation and misuse of terms, anachronistic use of terms as well, reading later concepts back into earlier times when no one knew what they were talking, and then when we know what they're talking about, they act like it's all over the place. No, I don't think so. Right? They do all this kind of stuff. So we get this conflation of narrative, right? We get this assumption of later doctrine, and then we get explicit adding of terms. I would think the very first thing you would ever do, in addition to looking for the conceptual traps, like I mentioned, is what they're saying actually in the text? They're saying there's one Jehovah on earth and another in heaven. It doesn't say that. Well, that's why they have you read the earlier verses. I know. Well, see, you got to point out, look, that's an angel man who came to get Lot. And whether or not it's still the angel who's the first Yahweh in verse 24, there's a whole period of time that is between Lot talking to that angel and that angel, if that's who you believe the first Yahweh is in verse 24, rains fire down out of heaven. So why are you saying that angel is on earth? That's what I'm not understanding. That's what the verse doesn't say that. That's why I don't understand why are you letting them get away with a fundamental assumption of wording that is critical to their argument, right? Very first thing I would look at is, okay, is it what you're saying actually in the text, right? One God the Father, word for word, boom. One God the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. No, that's not in the text. No, those words don't appear there. See? Now, they can argue for it, I understand, but see, you have to make sure it's distinguished. What they're saying isn't actually in the text. They're arguing, they're interpreting, just like we do. One of us is right or both of us is wrong. Either way, there's a difference between interpreting a word or name or conflating an account and what it actually says and what the accounts in their proper context tell us. So if you're not even willing to take the time to verify whether their actual argument, the words of their argument, are the words of the text, how seriously are we supposed to take your concern, your hand-wringing, your constant inability to grasp this concept of something that's not actually stated the way you're confused about it in the text? You know, and just how much time do you really want to devote to this metaphysical conceptualizing, right? Is that really, once you get out of the text, are you really is this really holding you up that badly? Not only not seeing that the words of their argument aren't there, that they're reading things that aren't taught or even known of at the time, but, is one God the Father not enough? That's enough for me. I don't see anything that trumps that or even threatens it. Certainly not Genesis 19:24. Sometimes I just wonder, we spend as much time, with the poor and the lowly, would we what kind of world would we have if we spent as much time helping people in need, right? Not people who are faking and cheating us, but real people struggling. We came together in a way that allowed us to put all this metaphysical speculation and conceptualizing, or even accurately defined according to what we know. If we just accepted the basic teachings of the text and just moved forward into the real physical world with them and tried to make a difference versus getting hung up and basically just stymieing ourselves over these metaphysical questions, I think the world would be such a better place. I appreciate the super chat, GL. Thank you very much. Let me see. Working still, but I'd just like to stop by and say hello to my beautiful brothers and sisters. So grateful. A little community of Christian Witnesses of Jah. Enjoy the live stream. Good comments. Thanks for your contribution, GL. We always appreciate it. All right. So I hope I was able to give you some insight into what I believe is going on in Genesis 19:24 in the surrounding context and why Trinitarians keep having these problems with it. I believe they're assuming their doctrine, they're conflating the text, and they're adding words from their conflation that aren't in the text that are essential to their argument. Either way, we will get back to that question of angels of Jah in Genesis another time. There's a lot more in Genesis. But I wanted to get something out because it's been came up recently, but it wasn't just this person recently. Some of you may have legitimate questions and concerns. Some of you may not really know a lot or have had as much familiarity with these issues. But some of you have, right? Some of you have been reading these things and studying these things for quite a while. And look at all the tools and things we have available today. Yeah, I can help you with some things, but do you really need me for a lot of this stuff? I don't think so. I would rather spend my time trying to help prepare things for you in a better way. And, if you really get to a point where you just can't figure something out in a grammatical or technical way, or even conceptually if it's necessary, I'll try to help you. Just try to make sure you're spending some time with these texts on your own before you allow other people, whether it's me or anybody else, to tell you what they mean. If you spend time really thinking about what these texts mean and reading them in their context and understanding each verse like we did just with part of the account, I think you'll be able to come up with answers on your own, maybe even better than me, because that's really all that I do. And I'm happy to help you. I just think that if I don't make a point of making you feel a little bit of shame or motivate you in some way to do this on your own, I'm going to be doing you a disservice. And you're going to come looking to me for some oil later, and I'm not going to have any. And I'd rather help you get your own right now. So try to look at it that way. Let's go ahead and finish up here. So, I brought up this whole idea of, helping people and working things out. And we've talked recently about, things involving people who don't see things the way I do, or, like necessarily the way I talk. I'll sometimes use certain words that are familiar to me and that are common, or even if I think they might be somewhat controversial, like retarded. Seems to be one that gets people's attention. I'm not using it in a way to refer to handicapped people, and I regularly make that clear. You could say the same for a term like dumb. The term dumb has been used for a handicapped person and a non-handicapped person. It's the same with retard, and that's just how I use it. And if you don't like it, that's okay, but you can't tell me what to say. You don't have that right, and I probably don't know you well enough to where even if you did, you should, right? Because I don't know most of you that way, right? And unless I openly offend you or do something, again, Matthew 18 level, and we're not here to run around, We're trying to get away from Watchtower, right? Trying to be merciful and loving to everyone, but not be so accommodating that we just don't ever, address a real problem. But again, it has to be a serious problem. Differences of opinion, speech, that is not something for you to go running around and condemning people over. In fact, Jesus says in Matthew 7, right? Why do you judge everybody all the time? It's nonstop, right? Stop it. So again, unless it rises high to the point where there's like hypocrisy and stuff that's going to be misleading and damaging to people or to you, or there's a material law broken or something, right? No. We're not here to tell people how to talk and the way to do your ministry. You've got an idea or something you want to offer, people ask you, yeah, great. Most people don't. So do your own thing unless they ask you for it, right? Otherwise, we have to try to look at the message. Right? When you think of Jesus, what do you think of mostly? Do you think of the way he talked? Like how he talked? Like his method of delivery, We don't know how it sounded, but like the way in his speech. You will get an example here in a moment before we partake. Don't worry, Betsy. When you think of Jesus, though, do you think of like what was his tone? What were the words he used specifically? Or do you think more of what he was teaching? Whether what he said was true? I'm gonna venture to guess, based on my experience, that you would probably say you mostly think about his teaching and whether or not what he said was true. And probably you also think of his words, but more so I would say it's the aggregate of his words, his teaching. You're probably not as focused on individual words he might use so much as the total teaching. So if he refers to someone as foolish, for example, or a hypocrite, probably it's not going to make you forget why they're a hypocrite, right? Or why he's saying they're foolish. Most of us remember the why, not just that he called them something. But that wasn't always the case. And there were some times, and we're going to look at one right now. I'll go ahead and bring it up, and we'll review it together. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the NWT this time. We can view it kind of linearly, and there's no real controversy or issue. So you non-NWT people, I don't want to hear it, right? You can use whatever you want here. I'm going to go ahead and bring this up. Second here. John 18 is where we're going to be. If you'd like to follow along, I'll go ahead and bring up the NWT. So before we partake, this is kind of what the thumbnail's about, okay? When you look at it, CW Jah discussion, this show, number 33, the thumbnail to this video has Jesus before the Sanhedrin, before the Jews. And he might not be before the Sanhedrin here, but he's before the chief priest. And he's being, asked questions about his teaching and his disciples. We'll go ahead and bring it up right here, John 18. Starting verse 19. It says, this is after Jesus has been arrested, right after the Garden of Gethsemane. It says, and so the chief priest questioned Jesus about his disciples and about his teaching. Verse 20. Jesus answered him, I have spoken to the world publicly. I always taught in a synagogue and in the temple where all the Jews come together. And I spoke nothing in secret. Verse 21, Jesus continues, Why do you question me? Question those who have heard what I spoke to them. See, these know what I said. Now, do you see anything wrong in what Jesus said here? Just the way it's written. All right, so he's got the chief priest asking him questions about his disciples and his teaching. He doesn't really answer those questions, though, does he? He just refers to what is true. There's no real, basically he's saying, why are you asking me? Which is what he says in verse 21, right? Why are you asking me? Shouldn't you already know, right? Isn't that what Jesus is saying here, everybody? Shouldn't you already know? Why are you asking me? I've taught openly. I always taught in the synagogue and temple. I didn't speak anything in secret. Why are you questioning me? Why haven't you questioned those who heard me? So he's basically pointing out that the chief priest doesn't know what he's talking about, right? Why are you asking me? I've talked to everybody, everywhere. How do you not know this? Why don't you ask the people who've heard me talking everywhere? In the synagogue, in the temple, in public, where the Jews come together, nothing in secret. Why are you asking me? Why don't you talk to the people who've been listening to me? Verse 22, after he said these things, one of the officers that was standing by gave Jesus a slap in the face and said, is that the way you answer the chief priest? Is that the way? John 18:22. Bible Hub, real briefly. John 18:22, just get a little more insight. These things now, of him having said, one standing by the officers gave him a blow with the palm, to Jesus having said, thus, in this way, hutos, answer you the high priest? He's talking about the manner, the way. Is this how? Is this how you answer the chief priest? In fact, let's go to the multi real quick just to get a sense. Is this the way? NIV. Is that the way? New Living. Is that how? English Standard. Is this how? Berean Study. New American Standard. Is that the way? King James. Answerest thou the high priest? So? Net Bible. Is that the way you answer the high priest? Do you see anything in what they're saying? What the officer's saying, I should say, that addresses what Jesus actually said? What did he say? You're asking me about my disciples and my teaching. Okay, well, I've been teaching for years in public, in the temple, in the synagogues, wherever the Jews come together, nothing in secret. Why are you asking me these questions? Why don't you go talk to the people who heard me? Or if I might make an application to modern times, why don't you go read what I wrote? Why don't you go watch the video? Why are you asking me? I've been teaching these things for years. Here, there, everywhere. Not in secret. No, for free. Boom. You and me. Why are you asking me these questions? And then what happens? Right? Instead of actually addressing the validity of what he says, boom, smacked him. The Son of God. Is that the way? Is that how? The way you talk. Yeah, whatever you said, it's all true. I don't like the way you talk. Or like one of the prior spiritual retards on this channel, John B., who we made an example of in one of our comments review videos because he came to me and made a retard comment, spiritually retarded. Claimed that me calling Tantheon, Hatheos in John 1:1 was bad because I was referring to it in its lexical form. Because John B's a retard. And he subsequently then, after I exposed him as being a complete idiot when it comes to these things, and not taking the rafter out of his own eye of stupidity before he came to try to counsel people like me, John B., as an example of retarded stupidity, runs around and defames me because I exposed his stupidity. Because people can't handle it. They can't handle the way you talk. You call me stupid. You call me retarded. You tell me you tell me why I question you? I'm the chief priest. What do you mean, why am I questioning you? Well, because I've been talking for several years, that's why. Have you not checked with anybody? Because, John B., it's very obvious that's not a problem when you refer to Hatheos in John 1:1 in terms of Tantheon, because there is no difference but the grammatical function in the text. And then for someone like John B., who shows his ignorance, to then run around and blaspheme people, shows he's really a slanderer like his father, the devil. And so people who love to attack Jesus, me, or anyone else, because they don't like the way we talk, better get used to it. I hope you get used to it. Or, even if you can't get used to it, try to focus on what I'm saying, not how I'm saying it. Because just like Jesus, you might feel like you're being insulted. And in some cases, you might be. Our final text, before we partake, it's coming right now, Betsy. I'm telling you, right now. Because sometimes you might feel insulted, just like that chief priest or the guard of the chief priest felt insulted because Jesus was telling him, whom he thought of, the guard, as the chief priest, more knowledgeable than Jesus, certainly in a higher position, worthy of more respect, when he said, why are you asking me this question? I've been out here teaching for years, public, open, everywhere. Why don't you ask the people who've heard me? Oh, they didn't like that, did they? Maybe it is an insult. Maybe Jesus, in telling the truth, was insulting them. Exactly what's wrong with that if it's true? Why is the chief priest asking him questions about his teaching and his disciples when he's been out here doing it and telling everybody for years? Just how concerned is the chief priest? Obviously not that concerned, is he? And the only concern they really showed was what? The way he talked. Last text, and then we partake. Luke 11:42. Through 54. Woe to you, Pharisees, because you give the tenth of the mint and the rue and every other vegetable, but you pass by the justice and the love of God. These things you were under obligation to do, but those other things not to omit. Woe to you, Pharisees, because you love the front seats in the synagogue and the greetings in the marketplaces. Verse 44, woe to you, because you are as those memorial tombs which are not in evidence, so that men walk upon them and do not know it. In other words, graves that people trample upon. Verse 45, and answer a certain one of those versed in the law in response to that, when he called them graves in the ground, tombs that people can't see, but that people walk over anyway. After he said that, right? And is he true? Is that true? All of us say that's true, right? Unless maybe you're a Jewish person or someone who doesn't accept Jesus. You believe that's true. In this case, that the ones he's talking to, verse 44, are like graves that you can't see, but people are stomping on as they walk on them. After that, verse 45, and answer a certain one of those versed in the law said to him, Teacher, in saying these things, you also insult us. Now, if we go to Luke 11:45 in the Bible Hub real briefly, just to get a comparison, Luke 11:45. We're almost there at the partaking. Hang in there with me. Thank you for joining me. Spent a little time with Genesis 19:24 because I wanted to get a little clip prepared that I'll cut later, in addition to our coming series, so that hopefully it helps people understand that account a little better. It doesn't say things Trinitarians claim it says. They have to conflate narratives without explaining the time difference between the two. And they ignore things that the angel men in those accounts state that wouldn't be true of Yahweh or Jehovah. And also add things that the accounts don't add to try to get their doctrine, that he's on earth and in heaven, two Yahwehs, which is not taught in Genesis 19:24. Luke 11:45, Bible Hub, NIV, one of the experts in the law answered him, Teacher, when you say these things, you insult us. English Standard, Teacher, in saying these things, you insult us also. New American Standard, you insult us too. King James, saying thou reproachest us also. Most say insult, right? So just like NWT, insult. Verse 46, we're reading this final account. We're going to partake. We're done. Then he said, this is Jesus. After that, lawyer, one verse in the law, objected to him, saying they were graves in the ground. Jesus says, woe to you who are versed in the law, because you load men with loads hard to be borne. You yourselves do not touch the loads with one of your fingers. Woe to you, because you build the memorial tombs of the prophets, because your forefathers killed them. Certainly you're witnesses of the deeds, your forefathers, and yet you give consent to them, because these killed the prophets, but you are building their tombs. Watchtower people, those of you who criticize me in ways that are similar to this, you're promoting a destroyed organization that has blasphemed God and his son repeatedly. You're witnesses of their deeds, even as you come and try to condemn us and claim we're insulting you for telling you the truth. On this account, the wisdom of God, Jesus himself said, as the parallel account in Matthew proves, I will send forth to them prophets and apostles, and they'll kill and persecute some of them, so that the blood of all the prophets spilled from the founding of the world may be required from this generation, from the blood of Abel down to the blood of Zechariah, who was slain between the altar and the house. Yes, I tell you, it will be required from this generation. Woe to you who are versed in the law, because you took away the key of knowledge. Yourselves did not go in, and those going in you hindered. Claiming everybody's the great crowd. How are they going to get in thinking that when they're not? Verse 53, second last verse. So when he went out from there, the scribes and Pharisees, the scholars and the false teachers, started to press upon him terribly and ply him with questions about further things, lying in wait for him to catch something out of his mouth. But then he went on to warn his disciples about the hypocrisy of the scribes and Pharisees and to teach the crowd. It's how they act, everybody. It's what they do. They love to try to condemn people, whether it's Jesus or me and you, just because we tell them the truth in a way that they don't like to hear. Well, guess what? If you claim I insult you, unless you can show that what I'm saying is not true, the insult's on you. The insult's because what I'm saying is true, and you don't like it. And that's not something I'm ever going to change, nor did Jesus have to, nor should anybody have to, just for you, so you feel better about yourself and your terrible ways. We all have to face ourselves, confront our issues, and you are no different. Watchtower people or anyone else who doesn't like the way certain things come out or the words we use, that's fine. Is what we're saying true or not? That's the only thing that matters, according to Jesus. Because he went on to say in that account, if we go back to it, just to conclude real quickly, Betsy, I know, but I wanted to break real quickly right there. This is the last part. He stopped right here. Is that the way you answer the chief priest? John 8:22. He hits him on the face after he doesn't say anything but what's true in a way that they didn't like. Is that the way you answer the chief priest? Verse 23. Jesus answered him, if I spoke wrongly, bear witness concerning the wrong. But if rightly, why do you hit me? In other words, why are you bothered by anything but whether I'm wrong or whether I'm right? Is that not what he's teaching right here as he speaks in a way that in their view insults the chief priest by telling him he's an idiot? He's someone who should know better by now. After all, he's been teaching everywhere for years. How is it you don't know by now? Is that how you answer him? Boom. You may not like what I said or how I said it, but am I wrong or am I right? And if I'm right, why are you so upset? That's what that account proves. And it also shows us who's who many times. With that in mind, we will now partake of the bread and wine and conclude our meeting together. Thank you all for joining me for Christian Witnesses of Jah live discussion number 33. We'll be back with number 34 next week, but I'll be back tomorrow. Earlier live stream, probably around noon California time, Proverbs chapter 2, text reading. Don't miss it. From my translation coming out soon. Now we will partake of the body of the Son of God who gave his body and blood on our behalf that we might have life through him. That whereas in Adam all are dying, so in Jesus and his sacrifice, all who have faith in him are being made alive. And all who live according to the law of their heart, as the Bible also teaches, whether they actually have direct knowledge of Jesus or not, he and the Father will be their final judge. And similarly, the wine representing his blood. It's our Christian ritual that we try to participate in together because it fills us with the shared knowledge and belief by practice that if we continue to have faith, we will continue to have life. And in doing so, we also proclaim our belief based on good reasons, the best that we believe are available, that Jesus will come again and restore the earth to a new earth that will give forth the glory that God deserves. So with that, I thank you all for joining me I pray you have a wonderful evening. I'll see you again tomorrow if you're going to join me for the live stream text reading of Proverbs chapter 2. Otherwise, I'll see you next Saturday, and may Jah bless you all. In Jesus.